Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. This is your host, Eric Dwinells, reporting to you from the end of April 2020, stuck in our corona quarantines. But today we are going to take a trip back to March of 2016 to explore Disney's Haunted Mansion in this ReMix episode. Now, the very astute among you will notice that I am not going in episode order now because we are skipping over an episode. That is correct. We are skipping over the Backmasking Hidden Satanic Messages in Modern Music episode because I already remixed and re-released that episode just this last summer to get us into the Charles Manson series because it kind of ties in there. So I'd already redone that episode. I didn't want to present it again. There's a couple episodes I might skip here and there, either for reasons like that or just because I'm not fully satisfied with the episodes. So tonight we're going to be going back there with my guest, Arron of Magic and Misadventure, and he's going to tell you all about that on the episode, but I hope you guys will check him out and give him a follow on Instagram and everywhere else. And I love the Haunted Mansion. It's got to be, I mean, it's not the most thrilling ride in Disney, but I think overall it's got to be my favorite ride because of sentimental reasons and because it's ghosts, and the ghost illusions are still great, even though they're over 100 years old. Not the ride itself, but the illusions. I mean, some of what they do, the Pepper's Ghost and all that. So just a really interesting Imagineering going on, and a fun backstory to it, and a fun story to the ride itself. So with all that said, please enjoy this episode of Spooky Ass Shit. Welcome, foolish mortals, to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Dwinells. And tonight, the silly spook sitting by my side is the webmaster of magicandmisadventures.com, and also the writer and the creator of that website, Arron Cohen.
Hello, Eric.
How are you?
I'm all right.
All right.
I'm doing all right. Looking forward to talking some spooky ass shit.
All right, so tonight we're going to be discussing Disney's Haunted Mansion, or maybe mansions, I should say. And the reason normally we do heavier topics on this show. Like, we talk about ghosts and demons and stuff like that. But every once in a while, it's nice to just look at a maybe silly kind of spooky topic. A lighter side of the spooky realm. So that's what we're going for tonight. And we're going to start our lighter side of things with the Haunted Mansion because I guess it's probably my favorite attraction in any of the Disney parks. I do really like Tower of Terror too, but I think you get a little bit, aside from maybe it's not quite as thrilling as Tower of Terror, I think you get a little bit more bang for your buck with the Haunted Mansion.
Yeah, when I was 3-year-old, little kid, man, that scared the crap out of me. Haunted Mansion.
I unfortunately didn't get to go when I was that young, but
I don't think I was like that young, but I do remember when I was a little kid, going on the ride with my parents and grandparents and all that, and being terrified. Yeah, 'cause I was a little kid, but I loved it. I really couldn't wait to go on it, and I was super excited. But then I'd be on it, and that fear, the butterflies, ooh, there's ghosts, and you can go backwards at one point, and yeah, it was scary, but I stuck with it, and it's my favorite as well. I actually once rode it 13 times in one day because I was bored. I guess is the best. Best excuse I can give for that.
All right, well, however you see fit to spend your $70 or whatever they charge you to get in the door. As long as you had a good time, I guess.
Oh yeah.
I went on Halloween for Disney's Trick or Treat, or Mickey's Not So Scary.
Yep.
Trick or Treat.
Not Scary Halloween Party. Yep.
Yep, and I went as Jason Voorhees on vacation. So I was Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th movies with the hockey mask and everything, but I had my first time button. And I was wearing a Mickey Mouse t-shirt, and I had the Mickey ears that said Jason.
Nice. Very nice.
And I thought it might be too scary for the kids, but they loved it, actually, because most of them don't really know who Jason is, first of all. And then they were just like, oh, that's a cool looking... And I was wearing Mickey ears, so they weren't,
so automatically
scared.
Friendly.
Yeah. But it was cool. I took some pictures with the Haunted Mansion folks.
When I worked at the parks, I worked over... at the time was Disney MGM Studios. Now it's Hollywood Studios. And every now and again, they'd be like, oh, hey, we're gonna do a tour through an attraction like, after hours, so you can see with the lights on and see what it would look like, and kind of just see the workings of it without the ride happening. Like I walked through a Great Movie Ride once, and I always swore, and I never did it, that the one ride I would never walk through with the lights on was Haunted Mansion, because yes, as a intelligent adult, I know how the tricks are done. I know how the mechanics work, but that's the one I wouldn't want the magic ruined for me. Like any other ride I'll walk through. I've walked through Splash Mountain. I've walked through some other ones. I will never walk through that one with lights on because I don't want like to see it like that.
Yeah. Even sometimes the way it is set up, you can see like when the pop-up ghosts come up, you can kind of see their
you can
rods and
definitely
everything.
See you can see the strings as it were to use the
but
phrase.
even when that happens, I'm like, oh, I really wish I hadn't seen that. That said, we are going to discuss how some of the illusions are done, but we'll give you guys a warning before we get into it.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. We're not going to like break it down 100% for you, but we'll give you terms and stuff that you can look up if you so wish to figure out how it's done. None of it's new. It's the ones we're talking about are centuries old tricks that have been around. So,
and it's all over the internet, so it's not hard to find.
The Haunted Mansion, if I'm not mistaken, it was basically one of the original ideas for Disneyland.
It was actually one of the first Imagineers after Walt, of course, was a man by the name of Harper Goff, and he actually drew up some of the early concept designs for this park that would become Disneyland. And one of the earliest designs for the park had a section that was called the church, the graveyard, and the haunted house. So this idea of having kind of a spook house, ghost house, has been around since they first started sketching out the designs when the park was just like one big kind of like old Main Street USA style park, and then as it evolved, it's been in and out of the Disneyland project for as long as there has been a Disneyland project.
Originally, it was very run down looking, like what you would think of as typical kind of haunted house.
Yep.
But apparently, Walt looked at it and said, "No, we have a really clean, pristine park here. We don't want like a big rundown building being the center of it at the end of Main Street."
That was one of the reasons the project got put on hold for a while, was they didn't have a better design for it. And the ultimate Disneyland design is actually based on like Victorian, like plantation style houses, like because in Disneyland it's in New Orleans Square,
right?
So it's kind of based on that. What's interesting is it's also based on, I believe it's called the Winchester Mystery House.
Yes.
I think that's what it's called, and it's basically the widow of Winchester, who created the Winchester rifle, was, I think, batshit insane is the technical term. And like after he died, she was obsessed. Like some psychic told her that the only way to avoid the spirits of the dead that her husband's invention had killed was to basically keep adding on to her house. So there were like doors that went nowhere, staircases that went nowhere, and like random
allegedly
rooms.
It was supposed to confuse the spirits,
right? And like she kept building until she died, basically.
Right.
Like for 30 years, she kept adding on to this house, and apparently, it was I think it was Ken Anderson, one of the early Imagineers, who went there and saw like these dead ends and these long hallways with no going nowhere. And that was actually sparked a lot of the early creative ideas for the mansion as well, was the Winchester Mystery House.
All right.
Which I've never seen. I would love to go see at some point, but I've never gone to see it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it in person, but it's on like every kind of special about haunted buildings.
Right.
They talk about it all the time. I don't mind hearing about that one so much, but there's a couple places, like if I have to hear about the goddamn Myrtles Plantation or the Queen Mary ship one more time, I don't know why those two in particular bug me, but I just don't like hearing stories about those places. I don't know why.
Weird. I think you should have your head looked at about that. Anyways, and actually, and one of the things is one of the early treatments of the attraction was it was a walking tour,
right?
Led by a butler or maid who would walk you through room to room, and that actually lasted for a while until they just started realizing the throughput, to get guests through as fast as possible. Like you're talking thousands of guests they want me to get through here per hour. And eventually, and that also, as they perfected the Omnimover technology in the World's Fair, I kind of helped that as well. But yeah, no, it was supposed to be a walking thing originally.
Yeah, and then they invented the Omnimover, which for this attraction is called
the Doom Buggies.
That's right. And one of the things they liked about that was that they could control then what the audience was seeing.
Yes.
They were literally moving you to look at what they wanted you to look at.
Yeah, the Omnimover technology has been used in a lot of Disney attractions just because of that, because it's a great control system, and it's super smooth and it's super quiet. And really, the invention of the Omnimover technology, which they designed and invented for the 64, 65 World's Fair projects that they were in there. Once that invention just really was great for some of their attractions.
Yeah. So you mentioned Ken Anderson.
Yes.
Who is a Disney legend. Now, I don't just mean like, theoretically he's I mean he's literally a Disney legend.
Yes.
Which is like the Disney Hall of Fame. It's like the in-company Hall of Fame that they have.
Yeah. They I think every year they announce like the newest Disney legends, and now it's not necessarily all Imagineers. It's people that have different things to do with the.
No, Johnny Depp just got in last year.
Yeah, I think George Lucas is a Disney legend now.
Yeah.
They just let anyone in now.
It's supposed to be people who have made like a major contribution to Disney in some way.
Right.
And I guess that both of those guys have.
Yeah. Ghosts. But he is a legendary Imagineer, and he was involved with the project from the start.
Yes, he was. And not just an Imagineer, he was also a writer. He wrote the stories that were going to be used for the mansion.
There were a few stories.
But he also wrote the Disney scripts for Cinderella, The Jungle Book, Robin Hood, and a few more movies as well.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty big deal.
Well, and that was especially early Disneyland, the Imagineers pulled double, triple, quadruple duty.
Yeah.
Because the idea behind Imagineer wasn't just, someone that can build a cool theme park, build a ride, but it was Walt wanted people that could translate the experience of the film into a three-dimensional space. So a lot of the early Imagineers, especially a lot of the early Disneyland creators, were from the animation studio side of things that he brought over. There was a lot of crossover like that. Most, if not all, Disney attractions go through changes as they're being created. The initial concept happens, and then it gets tweaked, and it gets changed, and it gets altered, and more people come into it, and people leave, and all these things happen. And if you look at the original concept for almost any attraction versus the final product, they're going to look very different. The Haunted Mansion in particular had several different versions of the story over the years of its creation. One of the original versions was a nautical themed one. There was a sea captain who was a center point, who killed his bride, and he, for a while, was called Captain Bartholomew Gore. Then he was just called the Mariner, or just the sea captain, and he was kind of central figure. There was a treatment that was they called it Bloodmere Mansion, and it was a mansion they were supposedly bringing from somewhere in the south. A haunted mansion that they were bringing over and restoring brick by brick, but strange things kept happening when they were restoring, because they didn't realize, according to the story, they brought the ghost with them as well. So all these crazy things were happening, and then as the story, this was a much darker version, because as the story goes, a construction worker got walled in, and then they stopped the construction on it, and but now people are walking through this unfinished spooky ghost-filled mansion. There's a treatment that was much lighter in tone and centered on the bride character, who is a character in the final version, but it was much more focused on her. There was actually a version based on the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Headless Horseman, Ichabod Crane. So it really has seen a lot of variations over the years. Even before the ghost hosts, and you did your ghost host thing at the beginning here, there was a raven that was the narrator and brought people through it.
Yeah.
The
Raven still shows up a lot, but
the Raven shows
he's
up.
Not their narrator.
The Raven shows up. The Mariner shows up. The Bride shows up. So a lot of these things have been incorporated into the mansion over the years, but it definitely saw a lot of variations and ideas over the years, over the creation. And this is all from 1957 to probably 1960 was when all these changes were happening on this attraction.
Yeah.
And this was when it was still a walkthrough. But it was around probably 59 where it got put on back burner for a while. Walt still wasn't happy with the appearance of the exterior. He wasn't super happy with the throughput of the walking tour. and wasn't super thrilled with the story ideas. And this was after they had. There's two Imagineers who are central to our narrative here, and that's Yale Gracie and Rolly Crump. And there's more Imagineers were mentioned later, but those two were, a big part of the early on. And they actually did this whole mock-up of the Sea Captain version of it in like a soundstage. So Walt can come in and walk through basically and they built the illusions, and there's supposed to be this one illusion where you looked in this room and the room looked to fill with water and like drown the mariner, but then the water would drain away and everything would be dry and the mariner would be gone or something like that. Like there's some cool things, but it got put on back burner. This was when they were focused on the World's Fair for 64-65. This was when...
one thing before we get into that is that Disney actually announced their haunted house in 1961, and they were giving out handbills at Disneyland announcing that it was going to open in 1963.
Yeah, and then in 63... so in 63, New Orleans Square opened.
Right.
Which is where Haunted Mansion is located in Disneyland. And the mansion didn't open with it. And then Imagineer Marty Sklar made a sign, a recruitment sign, that was put up outside of the building that would eventually become the Haunted Mansion, that was basically recruiting ghosts to come and live at this mansion. It's a pretty famous sign. You can look online. You can find it pretty easily. If you look Marty Sklar, Sklar, Haunted Mansion sign, you'll probably see it. And that sign sat there for years.
Yeah, well, so it didn't open in 63.
Right.
But they did, the facade was up maybe at that point?
I think the facade was up at that point, or something was up.
Yeah, that sign was definitely up, and then the facade may or may not, if it wasn't up then, it was being put up.
Yeah, I think and I wasn't there, it was a little before my time, not much, but a little bit. I think the facade was up by that point. I think they settled on this version of the exterior. But yeah, that ghost sign, that like inviting ghosts to come live at Disneyland, to come live in this mansion, that went up and that sat there up there for a while. And that's one of the things that if you look at some of the early buzz about and there's a lot of buzz about this ride. It was a spooky ride.
Right.
No one knew what it was. There's like inviting ghosts. And that was, there was years before this ride opened. There was a lot of interest in this attraction.
So my point about that is the facade and the sign being up. And I think there was also a sign that mentioned that they were around the world collecting ghosts. I think that was a little bit earlier, later. I don't think. But there was a variation on the sign too.
There was, and there was, but I don't know where that fell in the time frame exactly.
All right. Well, that's not as important as the point that I'm about to make, which is, can you imagine being a 10-year-old kid or something in 1961 or 63 or whenever these various announcements were made, and like a kid like me who was into spooky ass shit, I would have been so psyched.
Right.
And they just kept saying, "Oh, it's going to open this year. Oh, it's going to open this year."
And we'll get to the opening a little bit later in the history.
Yeah. It's not going to happen for a while.
Right. Yeah, because
we ain't there yet.
We're only 1963 now. Yeah. And so Ken Anderson, who was one of the early originators of this project, got sent over to the World's Fair project. So he was off of it. Mark Davis and Claude Coates got put on it around 1963-ish. And that was when it really started coming together in a way, but then there was still there was some drama behind the scenes.
Yep. It's a little disagreement.
Yes. So 1964 is when Mark Davis added the ghost host character, who is the final narrator. So that was a big moment in the Haunted Mansion storyline. And in 1965 is when they brought on another Imagineer by the name of X Atencio. Now, X Atencio had actually worked on Pirates of the Caribbean. He worked on the storyline for it. He worked on the songwriter for it. And X Atencio at the time would tell you he was not a songwriter. He was thrown onto this. And he's like, I don't know what I'm doing. But he wrote Yo-Ho, Pirate's Life for Me, which is the iconic Pirates of the Caribbean song. Obviously, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
So he actually got put on this attraction as well in 65. So now you've got this great trio of Davis, Coates, and Atencio.
Yeah. And Atencio, of course, would go on to write Grim Grinning Ghost.
Right.
For the Haunted Mansion.
With Buddy Baker, who wrote the music for it. And so a little side note at this point is it's still a walking tour. And Rolly Crump, who's another legendary Imagineer, weird guy. Like, he had some crazy ideas. He had like hearses that suddenly came to life and had like, you know, spooky stuff happening in them, and he was really into this, like, these bizarre, and he showed Walt all these crazy ideas because he had this concept of like the owner of the mansion basically collecting all this weird crap from around the world and bringing it back to the mansion. That became something called Museum of the Weird, which is a post show for the Haunted Mansion. So you walk through the mansion and you saw the ghosts and all the spooky stuff, and then as you're leaving, you walk through the Museum of the Weird. And that idea sadly never happened. And that
and
actually...
it's supposed to be like a restaurant, right?
Well, so that was actually... That Museum of the Weird replaced the restaurant.
Oh, okay.
Like, one of the... I mean, you've been to Disney, you know they like having kind of a spill zone, whether it be a gift shop, whether it be a restaurant, whether it be something that people walk out of when they walk out of the attraction. You know, usually a gift shop now, but the Museum of the Weird was one of the ideas for the spill area. They thought restaurant, because at Disneyland, there's actually a restaurant at Pirates of the Caribbean where you can sit and eat. It's called Blue Bayou, and you're kind of like overlooking the river where the ride starts. So you're watching people ride as you're sitting there eating, which is kind of neat. But yeah, so Museum of the Weird, that's one of the things that like I know was supposed to happen. I'm really sad never happened. I'd love to have seen that come to life.
Yeah.
And we'll readdress that a bit later, the Museum of the Weird, but that was an idea that came and went. When we were talking before the podcast, a couple days ago, you and I were talking about what we're going to talk about here. And there was Disney's Wonderful World of Color show, which was about 1965. It was they had a girl there. I forget her name now, but she was Miss Disneyland Tencennial. And basically, there's this famous video of Walt bringing her through the workshop, introducing her to Rolly Crump and talking about the Haunted Mansion. He couldn't remember the name of the...
I was just about to say, that's one of the really funny things about it, is he can't remember what they decided to call it.
Yeah.
So he's like, and here's our spook house.
Yeah.
Our house of spooks.
Yeah.
Our
yeah,
weird
and to be fair, it's probably changed names 100 times by this point. And he actually shows her, he's like, do you believe in ghosts? She's like, no. And he's like, well, look at this. And shows her like this little thing with the ghost appearing and playing the pipe organ. And he's like, do you believe now? And she's like, well, I guess I have to. I've seen the video a couple of times. You know, and that was really, so again, that's just whetting people's appetites. Like you said, like, you know, now people are seeing on TV, they're seeing this ghost illusion happen, and they're seeing Rolly Crump talk about some of these crazy things, and they're like, I mean, I'm sure like 10-year-olds were chomping at the bit to see this damn ride at this point.
Yeah.
And they still got a few years to wait, because this is only 65.
Yeah. And then in 66.
Then in end of 66, December 15th of 1966, Walt Disney dies. And throws kind of everything into chaos, because here's the man who oversaw everything. Like, he was the first Imagineer, and he created everything, and he oversaw everything, and he had his hands in everything, and now he's gone.
Right.
And that was sad. So
it was already a slowed production. Now it's just getting slower.
And now it's getting slower. But they were still continuing with it. It's the ideas are still coming. They're still going on. And this is about the time we mentioned tension earlier between Mark Davis and Claude Coates. Davis wanted a lighter story, something fun, something Disney, something kind of goofy. And Claude Coates wanted something much darker and scary. He was like, it's a haunted house, it's a spook show. People are coming expecting to be scared. We should scare them. And they really kind of didn't see eye to eye on it. And it was Dick Irvine, who at the time was the VP of design, who settled the tie and sided with Davis. But if you've been on the Haunted Mansion, and you said we're going to talk a little bit about the interior soon, the first half of it is very Claude Coates. It's a little darker, and you've got these dark hallways, and you've got the monsters clawing at the door, and you've got the doorknobs moving, you've got the spooky hands, shadows. And it's much more scenery and much fewer characters, so it's much creepier. Then when you get the second half, when you get to the swinging wake, when you get to the cemetery with the singing ghosts and the singing bus and all that, it's much lighter. So you almost see like this very clear delineation between the Claude Coates mansion and the Mark Davis mansion, like as you're riding it.
There is a big change.
And it was actually up to Exitencio to basically take their two ideas and meld them into one cohesive storyline. So I do not envy his job on this.
Yeah. He did a good job, though.
He did. And actually,
we'll get to how it actually happens in a little bit.
Yeah. And it's funny because he actually took for the story, he kind of played back to that sign because the mansion now is this collection of ghosts that have kind of come to this mansion.
999.
Yes, 999. But there's room for 1,000.
Yeah.
Any volunteers? So he basically kind of like harkened back to that sign, looking for ghosts to come live there, and incorporated that idea into the mansion. So it's kind of cool how everything came full circle in the end.
Before we move on,
yes,
there's a legend about the Haunted Mansion and about why it took so long.
Is this the reporter legend?
No, I don't think so.
Let's hear yours. Then we'll
okay. Well, the legend that I heard was that they did what they call a soft opening, which means like it's kind of a preview. It's not really open to the public, but they'll let a few people in. And the legend was that they let some people in, but the original design of the mansion was so scary that people were having heart attacks.
That's similar to the legend that I've heard, which is that they actually opened it to the press before the grand opening. And the version that I heard is that a reporter had a heart attack.
Uh-huh.
So same story. And then they had to close it down again before they could reopen it. So, and it's interesting how many legends formed around this ride that wasn't even open yet.
Right.
And just because by now it had been years and years and years and so many different versions, that it is kind of funny.
Yeah. So obviously, whatever version you heard, it's bullshit.
That's... Yeah. No one died, as far as we know.
Nobody had a heart attack. Nobody was scared to death or anything.
There was a point later on where once the mansion was open, where they actually experimented with live actors, and people got scared then, but no one had heart attacks.
Yeah, I've heard about there was supposed to be someone in a night suit.
Yeah, but people were getting scared, and actually, the version that I heard is that people's reactions when someone jumped out at them would be to like hit them and like push them away.
Right.
And it was a safety thing for the actor.
Right.
Because you're a guy in this like full suit of armor getting pushed by some random guest.
Yeah. Can't imagine it's easy just to get right up.
Yeah, right.
And even if you do, how spooky does that look if you're in the next Doom buggy?
Yeah. God, hey guys, little help. Yeah, so the ride opened on October 9th, 1969. And we've been talking...
Finally.
Yeah, finally. And, we were talking about all these people that couldn't wait and, chomping at the bit to see it. On August 16th, so about a week later, it had the highest single-day attraction numbers of any ride to that point. On August 16th, 1969, it saw 82,516 guests.
That's a lot of people.
In one day on one attraction.
So now the ride is officially open. And we're going to kind of walk you through the ride.
Sure, we can do that.
So there's a queue, and we'll get to that. Mm-hmm. Disney World has its own special queue, which was actually just came about, I think, in 2011 or so. I think that's right.
Yes, that sounds right to me.
But it's new anyway. So we'll get to that later on. The first thing that happens is you kind of walk in and you are put into this, I don't know if it's like an octagon or however many sides it has, but you're put into this big room where you're all standing there, and there's portraits on the wall. And then you hear the voice of the ghost host, who welcomes you with the same welcome that I tried. Now, I don't sound like the ghost host.
The ghost host was a voice actor by the name of Paul Frees.
That's right. And he is he also famously did the voices of Boris Badenov on the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, and the Burgermeister, Meister Burger in Santa Claus is Coming to Town, as well as many other voiceover roles, especially for Rankin and Bass. He did a lot of voices for them.
Yep.
You see the room begins to stretch. And I guess it depends on which park you're in.
So in Disneyland, it's an elevator, because the ride obviously can't be contained in this little facade of this mansion. So the actual ride structure is actually underground. It's actually below the building itself. So you have to get down there. Mm-hmm. So it's an elevator that brings people down.
So you're going down.
You actually are going down. And that effect... And they covered it up with this stretching room where you watch these portraits. That it's a portrait of a young lady holding a parasol, and then as the portrait stretches, she's on a tightrope, and then as it continues to stretch, there's a hungry alligator right below her, or there's an old woman sitting there holding a flower, and then she's sitting on a gravestone, and then there's a man's head with an axe in it on in front of the gravestone, things like that.
And remember that portrait in particular.
Yes,
by the way,
that one plays in later. So they covered it up well, and they've got the scrim ceiling, so you can see the hanging body when you look up at the end.
A scrim, by the way, for those of you not theatrically inclined, all theater people know scrim, I'm sure, but non-theater people, it's basically a piece of cloth that when you don't shine a light on it, it looks solid, and you can paint on it and stuff like that. Then when you shine a light through it, you can see through it.
Yes.
So when the light shines through the scrim, you can see a body hanging from the ceiling.
This effect, this whole room was so popular, even though it was born out of necessity, really. But of course, it's Disney, so they have to make it part of the story, which is part of the reason I love them. And so they actually have incorporated that into the Disney World version. What you have to understand too is,
in Disney World, I don't know if we said, but in Disney World, the ceiling actually goes up as opposed to you going down.
Because that's not an elevator. It's entirely just illusion at that point. Because also by this point, by the time Haunted Mansion and Disneyland opened, they are hard at work on creating Disney World. Like that Florida project's already happening. And given how popular Disneyland Mansion was already becoming before it even opened, they knew they wanted to put it in World. So by that point, when they were building models and building effects for land, they're building two of everything.
Right.
Like, so at this point, Imagineers are working double duty to get this all done.
Yeah. So even though they opened at different times,
right,
they were built exactly the same time, pretty much.
Yes.
At that point, you move into your Doom buggy. Yep. Well, depending on which park you're in, you move into the Doom buggy.
Well, either one has a loading zone.
Right, but in Disneyland, you go through the portrait gallery, right? You walk through it.
Yeah, it's basically an extension of the loading zone. It's basically you walk through like there's portraits on the wall, and then
I've never been to Disneyland myself, so I don't know.
But it's not a very long hallway.
Okay,
and it really is just an extension. So what we're talking about, the loading zone, is when you walk into, once you leave the elevator, the stretching room, you basically go into another area with stanchions and a small line, which then leads you to the actual Doom buggy vehicle. The Disneyland version is a little bit longer because you walk through the portrait gallery, which has some of the busts and it has some pictures on the wall, stuff like that. So just kind of more atmosphere. And
then there's just a bunch of little spooky areas. There's like an infinity hallway.
Yep.
Where you see candelabras kind of floating on their own, and it looks like the hallway never ends.
And when you're riding through there, if you look at the doors on the other side of the hallway, like the doorknob's moving by itself, or the door's bulging outward, or there's like a snarling monster behind it. So, and it really is. What's interesting about the fact that you're going from scene to scene is, unlike a lot of other Disney attractions, Mansion doesn't seem to have a very cohesive narrative, and it does. If you really know the story and you listen to it and you pay attention, but it really does seem almost like a series of scenes in a way, which is very different from other Disney dark rides, especially at the time, where they're based on like a property like Pinocchio or Snow White, something like that. So they're telling a story as you walk through,
right,
or ride through, or whatever the attraction is. Whereas this one is really like, okay, here's a scary room, here's another scary room, here's a different scary room. Side note, if you're on the ride and you're in the Doom buggy and, oh, hey, here's the infinity hallway with a candelabra in the distance, next to that hallway is a chair. Empty chair. There's a kind of fancy looking design on the back of it. That design is actually Hidden Donald. So for those of you who are not familiar with Disney attractions, every Disney attraction has hidden Mickeys in it. It is a image, reference, or something of Mickey Mouse. And there can be one or two or several hidden Mickeys throughout any Disney attraction. It's a little imaginary inside joke thing. And Haunted Mansion has a Hidden Donald, where if you look at these squiggles and kind of look at them at the right way, it forms Donald's head. It's very abstract.
Yeah.
But it's very specifically Donald's face, basically, on this random chair. So there you go. Little tidbit. Next time you go, check that out.
Okay. So we won't describe all the little rooms that you see, but there's some other spooky stuff. The next big scene that you get to is the seance room.
Yep.
With Madame Leota. And Madame Leota is a head, basically.
A head in a crystal ball?
In a crystal ball. And now the crystal ball floats. That was not the case back in the day. But
yeah.
Now the crystal ball floats.
Yay, modern technology.
Yep. And it's actually really cool. It looks really cool, and she calls out to the spirits. She's running a seance.
Yep.
So she calls out to the spirits and asks them to play different musical instruments. And the face... Well, first of all, the voice of Madame Leota is done by Eleanor Audley.
Yep.
And she is very famous for being the voice of Cinderella's wicked stepmother. And also Maleficent. Easy for me to say. However... Oh, you have something to say about her?
No, go ahead.
However, she did not do the, I guess you would call it face acting.
Right. The face acting was actually an Imagineer by the name of Leota Toombs, which, come on, is not like the greatest last name for this project here.
Spooky name.
And actually, Madame Leota is named after Leota Toombs.
Right.
And she did the face for it. She actually performed the face for it. And at the end of the ride, I'm jumping ahead, I know. The end of the ride, above kind of the last exit for the Doom buggies, there's little Leota, who's a full body, and she's the one that's kind of at the end going, "Hurry back." That's actually Leota again, but this time she provided the voice for it.
Right. So she's the face and the voice this time.
Yes.
But, however, it's not supposed to be the same character.
No, it's like Leota and little Leota, like the different characters, but it's the same person.
But just so people don't get the story confused when
Right.
they go see it. All right, then you get to what is probably my favorite scene in the Haunted Mansion, which is the ballroom scene. There's a birthday party. There's a lot going on in the scene, actually. But there's
the swinging wake, actually, is what it's called.
Swinging wake, sorry.
Yes.
So there's a birthday party going on. There's some ballroom dancing going on. There's a duel happening. There's people hanging off the chandelier.
In this, yeah.
But why I love this scene so much is because it looks like you expect ghosts to look.
Yeah.
Like they're transparent. They kind of appear and then disappear and then reappear again. But yeah, you can see through them and like that as a kid, like that's just what you expect ghosts to look like. And the really cool thing about it is that it's not a projection. It's not some kind of like trick like that. It's actually a very old theater trick called Pepper's Ghost. And it's really not that complicated. And you can kind of do it yourself for Halloween if you want to try to pull it off.
The technology for Pepper's technology, using the term loosely here, the illusion for Pepper's Ghost has been around for like over 100 years.
Right.
This was a favorite for like old school ghost masters, and it is really cool that it's still so like they haven't needed to replace it.
It's really effective.
It's great,
Right.
And it works so well. The duelists are super popular. There's Pickwick, who's the name of the ghost, who's dangling from the chandelier with a drink in his hand.
He's a good time ghost.
You got the guy playing the organ with the skulls coming out of the pipes and the pipe organ. He's one of my favorites just because that's a cool effect.
Yeah, and if you're in Disneyland, the organ that you're looking at is Captain
Nemo's. Yep.
Nemo's organ from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the original Disney version of the film.
Yeah.
Interesting fact. All right, so Pepper's Ghost, you can look it up online, but basically the way it works is you're seeing a reflection of a reflection kind of, then you're looking through glass that it's being reflected on, so it looks like it's sitting in the chairs or dancing on the floor or playing the piano, but it's actually happening kind of underneath you, and you're seeing a reflection of that.
Yeah. Basically, yeah. It's all just trick of lighting, really.
Yeah. It's really cool. Like, to me, like some people don't like to give away the secrets or whatever, but to me, how it's done is as interesting as how it looks when it's performed.
Well, especially in this case where it is such a simple, I mean, we could do it here in like the stuff you have in your kitchen.
Well,
this thing here, yeah.
I made a little Madame Leota seance box that I showed Aaron earlier, where if you look in through the hole, I basically use essentially a Pepper's Ghost illusion to make her head appear it's a ping pong ball, but if you look at it from there, it looks like a crystal ball.
It's just a simple thing, but the fact that all this, like, not only over 100 years since the original effect was created, but decades after it was put in the Haunted Mansion, it's still so effective and it's still being used. And, especially with Disney on the forefront of so much technology with projection tech and all these things to put into their attractions nowadays. The fact that this still kind of like withstands the test of time is just it's amazing.
Yeah.
This simple illusion is such a great effect.
Right. So we move on to the attic. Now the attic has changed a fair bit over the years. Most recently with the updates to the bride character.
Yep.
Which we'll get into a little bit. But originally, it was a bride on one side, and on the other side was what was supposed to be her groom, the infamous Hatbox Ghost.
Yes.
Now, what can you tell us about that character?
So the Hatbox Ghost was one of the original ideas for the final version of the attraction. And he is a spooky skeletal figure in a cloak and a top hat. And he's carrying a hat box. And the idea was that his head was on his neck, and then it would disappear and suddenly appear in the hat box. And now there's a headless ghost holding his head in a hat box. And then a few moments later, it would, disappear from the hat box and appear back on his neck again, and kind of go back and forth as doom buggies went by. And he was actually there when the ride opened in '69. For how long is up for debate. I've heard anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. The illusion didn't work. They couldn't. Imagineers, no matter how hard they tried, and with all the technology available to them at the time, could not get this illusion to work the way they wanted. So the Hatbox Ghost disappeared. And what's funny is he factored in so much of the merchandising early on. He was such a major figure. They really were setting him up to be kind of a major player in this attraction. And then he was vanished. Mm-hmm. For decades, he was gone. And
I think he became a big part of the legends. Yeah. And, he was too scary. And
the simple thing was they just couldn't get him to operate.
Right.
Until recently. And even as recently as a handful of years ago, they were still, couldn't get it to work. It wasn't until last year, 2015, that he got put back into the mansion. They finally got it to work the way they wanted it to. And I've seen the effect. It's amazing. It's so cool. You've got this spooky blacklit blue and black ghost, kind of like grinning at you as you go by. And all of a sudden there's a puff and his head vanishes and like a split second later just appears in his hat box and he's just still grinning at you and staring at you and smiling. And then it vanishes again and appears back on his neck again. And it's really cool. And it was kind of a big deal that he was put back in particular for the 60th anniversary celebration, the Diamond Celebration for Disneyland. It was kind of a great way to make a big deal about him coming back.
Sure.
But no, it's really cool that they were able to finally, not only that now they're able to do it, but they were like, you know what, we now have the tech, let's bring him back.
Right.
Let's bring back this 60-year-old character because he should be part of this mansion. I think I applaud the Imagineers who really just were like, he needs to be a part of it.
And that's one thing that's been great about Disney is that they're not afraid to celebrate their own history.
Oh no.
And know what the fans want to see too. Yeah,
and they definitely. I don't think there's any such thing as. And I'm not an Imagineer, so I don't know. But I would imagine there's no such thing as, dead entirely. I'm sure they've got all these ideas rattling around, and like, hey, you know what? 5 years ago we came up with this idea. Let's revisit that. Like, and that's what this is. That's what any creative process is. Using what you have and what you've thought of before to make it happen. The Hatbox Ghost is definitely one of the kind of the big players in the Haunted Mansion storyline, as it were, both in the mansion and in the legends of the mansion.
Right. Now, we turn to the other side of the room where we have the bride.
Yes.
Now, the bride was there from the beginning.
The bride was there, yep.
She's remained there, but she has changed considerably.
Yeah, originally she was basically just a wedding dress with no face but glowing eyes and a beating heart. There's a red light lit heart in her chest that would beat as you walked by, and
you'd hear it.
Yep, and that's all you like. It was basically essentially a dead room. Like there wasn't a lot in there. There was some spider webs with big spiders on them. There was some dusty stuff happening, and I'm gonna mention the dust particularly in a little while. And then there was at the end of that attic, there was this bride holding, I think it was flowers, and just with the beating heart, just staring at you as you walked by. And it was. I mean, it's spooky when you're 5, but...
yeah, well, you sort of wondered what her story was.
Right. So then when they renovated
Like you kind of, I mean, maybe not as a little kid, but when I got into high school and stuff, like, oh, maybe it was like a Great Expectations kind of thing where this woman was jilted and
I have a whole tangent about that in a moment, actually.
In the dress.
So Disney, reasonably recently in their history, designed and really perfected this projection mapping technology, where they've got basically a face, and they can project onto that, so it looks like a ghostly face. So they redid the bride. She now, talks, and her eyes move, and her mouth moves, and an axe appears in her hand. They gave her a name. She's no longer just the bride. She is Constance Hatchaway.
Right. And before you get to her, you see some portraits.
Which this is so. Anytime they say they're going to renovate one of the attractions I love, I get a little nervous. So I'm like, is this when they destroy it? And I've seen attractions get wrecked.
Right.
Where like they've renovated it, and it's a shadow of its former self. So every time they close Haunted Mansion, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna renovate it," I always I hold my breath for years. It's hard. But I will say that the bride's new attic is my favorite of the reasonably recent. I think it was 2007. I want to say. One of my favorite things. One of my favorite additions. So basically, because now it tells her story. So what you're seeing is these portraits of her with a husband. And then as you pass this portrait, the husband's head disappears. Then further down, there's another portrait with another husband, and then his head disappears. And basically, so now you're seeing her as the Black Widow bride. Like now you're seeing her tail.
She's also getting another string of pearls every time
the
husband dies. So in each picture, she's wearing more pearls.
And I think that's just, and we mentioned earlier in the stretching portrait, the old lady sitting on the gravestone with the man's head with the axe in the head. That is her.
Right. Because his name is George. And then when you're upstairs, the name on the tombstone is George. When you're upstairs, you see her with a portrait of a husband whose name is George. And she's also holding a single rose. Yeah.
The and Disney people have maintained that is her. So yeah, that I love Constance. I think she's a great addition.
So she lived to an old age, but her spirit appears in her younger age.
So after you leave the attic and after you pass the Hatbox Ghost, your Doom buggy turns around and goes down backwards, slowly. Here's where you see the Raven above you, glowing red eyes, squawking at you.
And like a swirl of spirits.
Yep. Like just going past you.
Now, I've heard a theory. I don't know if this is an official Disney theory or if this is just something that riders have come up with. That at this point, you, as the passenger, die.
I've heard that as well. So basically, if you listen as you turn around and go backwards, I don't know if the sound effect is still there or not. You hear shattering glass. The idea, and again, I don't know if it's official Disney story or if it's a fan-created thing, is that you're basically either getting pushed or throwing yourself out of the attic. And so this slow drop backwards down into the cemetery is your descent from the attic window down to the ground.
Right.
And now you're in the cemetery. I have heard that, but again, I don't know if it's official or fan theory. It sounds fan theory to me, but again,
the theory I think is just that then when you hit the graveyard, you're invited. You're one of the spirits now.
Right.
So now they're not scary. They're all partying.
Yeah.
And this is where it's not. We said it kind of turns to not spooky, really, in that way. And this is where it happens, all through the graveyard scene. Yeah,
you've got the opera singers, you've got ghosts on a seesaw, you've got ghosts playing chess, you've got the skeletal hand walling himself into the mausoleum.
Yep.
And you've got the singing busts. And there's a bit of a
and the Manch's only living character.
Yes, the grave tender and his dog.
Yep. And his dog.
So the singing busts, they sing Grim Grinning Ghosts as you're going by, and there's one bust, the lead singer, who a lot of people think is Walt Disney, because he's kind of a
he does sort of look like him.
He does. He's got especially when you're looking like basically black and white because it's made to look like a marble bust. but he's actually not. He is a man by the name of Thurl Ravenscroft.
Which might be the only name better than
Leo Toombs. I know.
That is a badass name.
I know, Ravenscroft. Like, that's awesome.
And Thurl, like, that's Thurl.
Yeah.
Thurl.
Thurl Ravenscroft is actually fairly well known. He was the voice of the Grinch in the...
well, not the Grinch. He was the voice...
he was the voice of the...
He sang You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch.
Right, okay. He was in the Grinch, yes. Yeah. And he was the voice of Tony the Tiger.
They were great.
And then you come around, so you go through the graveyard, this fun kind of like ghostly party scene. This is where what you talked about earlier, the little zombie guys that pop up from behind the gravestones.
Right.
That's where they are. And then you pass the hitchhiking ghosts. So you got the tall, skinny one, the skeleton. You've got the traveler who's carrying his traveling bag, and then you've got the prisoner, who's long white beard and a ball and chain. Unofficially, their names are Ezra, Phineas, and Gus. And I say unofficially because it's gone back and forth as to whether or not that's official. These are like fan-given names that are kind of stuck, essentially. Right. As you come around this final, now you're looking at mirrors, and these three ghosts, or one of the ghosts of those three, are sitting in your doom buggy with you when you look in the mirror. And they've actually upped this effect fairly recently.
Yeah, I haven't seen the update. It sounds pretty cool.
The update's really cool. So originally, it was just like, oh, here's Phineas sitting next to you, and like his head's waving a little bit, and kind of thing. And
which was pretty cool to begin with.
It was pretty cool. It was very cool, and they've used modern technology. This is one of the areas where they've really used some modern tech. So now the ghosts kind of interact with you a bit. So I was on the ride earlier last year, and all of a sudden, one of the ghosts appears kind of sitting on top of the doom buggy and reaches down and like takes my wife's and my heads and swaps them. So in the mirror, you're seeing us with reversed heads and the ghost kind of laughing about it. And then you go around and there's little Yoda saying,
"Hurry back.
Be sure to bring your death certificate." And then you're done.
That's it. And then you get out.
A
surly attendant helps you out. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Arron Cohen, for being my guest co-host.
No, thank you for having me on tonight. This is a lot of fun.
So your website again?
My website again is magicandmisadventures.com. It is a Disney blog. From there, not only can you read all the fascinating things I have to say about Disney, but there are links to my Facebook page, my Twitter feed, my Instagram, my YouTube, all Magic and Misadventures. Like you said, social media. It's a thing. So go read all the stuff I have to say. Go follow me everywhere on social media ever. And we'll be great friends. It's going to be a good time.
Spooky Ass Shit now has its own social media presence. You can find us on, let's see, what did I sign up for? Twitter, @SpookyAssShit, and Instagram, @SpookyAssShit.
Sensing a theme here.
Yeah. And if you have any spooky-ass questions or comments or show ideas, go ahead and email those over to us at spookyasshit@gmail.com. That's all one word, spookyasshit@gmail.com. Until next time, don't be afraid.
Hurry back.